Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 112 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to build some new smelter setups that we plan for, including making coils and alloys. Enjoy! So my hope is that we basically build each one of these, or at least the complicated ones. I suppose stuff like this is fairly straightforward, but still, it would be nice to build all this here, get all the necessary resources placed, and then we can just pick them up with bots and go down and place them. Okay, well, let's build backwards here, where we're going to have one set of strand casting machines supplied by these three different sets of induction furnaces. So we need to do 60 strands casting machines. I'm not going to worry about the pumps or the pipes for now. We'll just get these set up properly, so we need 60. You can see how these are pretty large machines, so 60 of these is going to be significant. You can also tell by power output, 9.3 megawatts, that it's all going to consume a lot of power. And then we need 6.7, 6.7, and then 26.7, so let's just pick up like 40 of them. Let's get to work, and this is probably going to take a lot of space. So I want to try to do it in a way where we can fit it all in here. So making the iron sheet coils is we have our input of water on one side, and then the input of the molten iron on the other. There's two inputs, but it's just the one thing. Let's see, let's make it as repeatable as possible. And then, what's the output of each one of these? Probably not very much. Nope, because it's very dense. So yellow inserters all around. And we can have power poles kind of placed like that. Let's just make the belts go down. So that's two of them, so we need 60 in total. So 4, 6, 8, 10. Let's get rid of flashing. So that's 10. Let's see, this can be 20. Not sure which shape we want to go for. But let's copy this again. So that'll be 30. Then if we copy this one more time, there's our 60. So let's go in here and get rid of the excess poles. Okay. Now we definitely want some lights in here. But yeah, that's what 60 of these looks like. Now we need to get rid of extra pipes. And gotta link all the wires together. And we have an output here of 30 per second. And there's our output, which will go into a warehouse or something like that, and then go into a train station. So now we need to get all of the liquids in here. And it's the status of those liquids that we're going to use for logic. So it's going to be slightly unrealistic, but we're going to use a storage tank and put a circuit condition on that. And actually, I think that's something that we can research. Do fluid handling too, which gives us access to the second tier of storage tanks, which require a regular tank and Invar plates, which we do have those Invar plates just sitting around. And now it'll hold 50k each. And a pump that we can't use because we don't have the aluminum quite yet, but unlocks a faster pump. So let's grab that. Anything else we can research here? Not yet for fluid wagons. Looks like that's going to happen pretty quickly. I'm not going to worry about upgrading the whole factory's worth of tanks quite yet, because usually that would be changing logic settings as well. But stuff like this would come in handy, especially for situations like we were dealing with the acid train, where if we upgraded the size of those tanks, then suddenly they would be bigger than the acid train, and we wouldn't have to have these buffer tanks in here anymore. That would make things easier. But I'm fine with just leaving what we have in place and then just making future setups better. So let's grab some Invar plates. We have many, because we were trying to get rid of all that nickel. And it's piling up again, but it hasn't hit critical mass yet. I have been emptying out the copper, but it looks like it's about to fill up again. So our factory is overloading on copper. I actually don't know if there's that many places to dump copper. I mean, it goes into a lot of things, but I don't think we can actually dump it. So, not yet anyway. So we're just gonna have to deal with it. Fluid handling 2. They're upgraded from tier 1 tanks, and we've got quite a few of them, so let's just grab them. Although, unfortunately, in this situation, I think I kind of want to use an all corners tank here, just to minimize the potential for problems. Let's see, so let's put a tank in here. It doesn't have to be super close or anything. But an advantage of the all corners tank, it's just no pipes fighting. It's kind of like what I've been using warehouses for, where it's a balancer of liquids, of different liquid systems. So we've got 3 inputs, 1, 2, and then this third one here can be right here. Although I suppose we could just offset it a bit, so that's not necessary. There we go. Nope. There we go. So that's what we're going to use for our logic, but now we need to set up our induction furnaces, so we need 3 different sets, and this is where things get a little complicated, because we're going to have lots of belts here. 4 red belts going into these ones, and then 2 red belts into that, and 2 red belts into that. However, we can make it a little simpler where the factory only has 120 ingots a second, so we don't need to have more than 4 red belts. So we can have the 4 red belts going into these induction furnaces, and then they can keep going and have one of those red belts, or maybe some splitters in there, going into these 6.7 and those 6.7. Okay, well, let's do 28 induction furnaces then. Let's see what that's going to look like. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then our 14. With our plastic pipes in the middle. Although probably should have undergrounds in here for fluid flow reasons. This is as wide as the setup is. We kind of want to try to make it fit within this. It doesn't strictly have to, but since we have a shape here, we kind of want it to be narrow enough to fit in here. So let's try to go for that. It looks like we only need 1 red inserter per machine. And actually, the way this is set up is that each one of these can consume a red belt. Something like that. So that's 14. And this will be our 28. And I can already tell it's going to be wider than this part down here. Can always change the shape of this if necessary, but we'll have to see what it looks like. This is only going to be the case with certain setups, because like making copper sheet coils, for example, we only have one method of molten copper. And that's with copper ingots. So these would fit very well going into that. It's just with iron, because there's several alloys, that it's going to be bigger and more complicated. So it's okay if some of them are wider. Of course, they're not going to be smushed right into each other like they are here. This was just done for space reasons, but we're definitely going to space them out with gaps in between, so we have room to expand. Hopefully something like this, where if we need to make changes, that room will exist. Now, this isn't really meant to expand as far as fitting more production in, because this is basically the maximum. But there's still space here for modifications, and that's what we need, is just space for modifications. You never know what you're going to be doing, so you always want to leave some doors open, within reason. Of course, the more you space things out, the harder logistics get, and the bigger your base is, and the longer it takes to walk anywhere. So you have to balance all those things out. Let's do another power pole, so no flashing. Something like this, but we probably want some lights. Well, that's our standard input. We also need 6.7 of them for mixing with manganese, and 6.7 for mixing with silicon. And then actually, one thing we can do is, because we need one red belt for each of those, these red belts in the middle are fine. They can just terminate there. But on the outside, we can put our 6.7 machines just outside right here, pulling from this same belt. And then have an additional belt coming in, which is the extra alloy ingredient. So how do we want to do this? I like doing things down, and that whole setup is up, so I have to kind of imagine this in reverse. But I suppose it doesn't really matter whether it's manganese or silicon on either side. So we can put our 7 of these on one side, and it's exactly half the same number because they are twice as fast. So let's say that's the one that uses manganese. And we need a couple more. Probably can just build this side and then copy it over there. So as far as these machines go, they need one red inserter for each input. So we can do long-handed right there. Then regular underneath it. And we can do alternating power poles. Then copy this to the other side. And pick up the part we can't reverse. And flip that around. So it makes more sense. Although, it looks like it's not quite in the right position. Okay, out of bots, but that's mostly done. Oh, steel is so slow. Were you like loaded up on something here? No, it's going, it's just, it's going slow. Man, we're so close to be able to make our own plates. I mean, we already have the steel ingots ready to go. But I don't know if it's worth building a whole logistics setup just to get this a little faster. Especially because I can just make a trip with one of the vehicles and pick up stuff. So we'll have to see. There might be some ways of grinding out some resources a little faster. But we still have stuff to do. So it's only when you're sitting and waiting and you have nothing to do that that's a problem. Because that's what happens in Factorio. As long as you have stuff to do, it's okay that your factory needs time to do something. It's when you stop and you're just staring at the screen waiting for the factory to do something, that's when you need to get to work making it faster. As long as you have something else to do, the slow speed isn't a problem. Okay, this looks pretty good. Let's just try to get it all wired up here. Actually, we could pretty much get it centered. Now that it's so big, it's probably a job for the bots to do. Okay, let's pick this whole thing up. And we need to place it. Ideally somewhere somewhat centered. It's actually pretty close. Well, let's see here. How many spaces does it have? So it's over by 2 spaces on that side. And by 1 space on that side. So that's pretty close. It's just going to take the bots a little while to get it nice and straight. So we need to get these pipes in here. Let's just do it with undergrounds. There we go. Let's get all this built. And then we can do the logic. Probably can get this hooked up with some power lines here. So the circuit network here is going to have 2 different methods of control. The first is the status of the tank here. And this is because we want to have a priority. So let's say that all 3 of these lines want to operate. Well, if that's the case, then they'll all be fighting. So we want to have a priority to where certain ones will run before the others. So we have to look at, well, which one is the least desirable? Well, it's probably just regular iron, because that one will always run if all else fails. Then we have these 2 other methods, silicon and manganese. Manganese is probably the most desired option just because manganese is a byproduct and this is pretty much the only way to get rid of it. So we always want that method to run if it can. And silicon is between them. So let's say if the tank is under 40,000, manganese will run. If it's under 30,000, silicon will run. And if it's under 20,000, iron will run. And of course, all the higher priority methods will also be running. So if the tank level is low, everything will be running. Or at least it'll be attempting to run. So we're going to control this tank's level based on the inserters that pick up iron ingots. The inserters that pick up the rare ingots, manganese and silicon over here, will be enabled or disabled based on the circuit condition of the warehouses that hold the resources. Now, since manganese is a byproduct, it probably should always run. So we actually don't need a circuit condition on that one. But we do want to have a circuit condition for silicon here. And we have to decide, when do we want to start dumping resources? Because we don't want to necessarily start dumping resources when these tanks get full. Let's say at 80,000. Because then if we can't get rid of those resources, then this tank is just a giant buffer. Like, if we have the set point to 80,000, it's a big buffer for not being able to make silicon, but it's a poor buffer for having too much silicon, because then there's no empty space. So if we set the limit really low, like 20,000 or something like that, then it has a high buffer for filling up, but a low buffer for not being able to produce it. So we probably want that set point to be somewhere in the middle. How about 40,000 then? Because that's half the working level of these warehouses. They hold 100,000, but functionally we don't want them ever to go above 80. And that's where some of them have the red lights going because they're stuck at 80. See, that light is not working as intended. It's supposed to have 2 red lights here, not just the one. I have to go check it. I see. This is equal to 1, but it probably should be equal to or greater than 1. So pretty much all of these need to be equal to or greater, which is kind of annoying. Okay, there we go. So lights are functioning as normal now. So you can see this line has 2 conditions telling it to stop and 1 telling it to go. And interestingly, it's actually empty, which should not be the case. So something is wrong there. Ah, another error here. I don't have too many resources in my inventory, but there was that problem. Actually, I'm just going to put a chest here for now. Just dump some stuff in there. Because I'll eventually find that. But finding the random items I dropped, those are a little harder. There it is. Of course, it's not going to get very far because the stop conditions, but the way this is working is it's taking the stop and start conditions and basically separating them onto their own signal. And I had to do that so the colors would stay independent. So all it's doing is taking the green start and stop signals and the red start and stop signals and putting them on their own little cable. And then you have a light where if it's equal or greater than 1, you get a light. Equal or greater than 2, get a light, etc. So since we have 2 reds, there's 2 there, and 1 green, there's 1 there. So that's just like the visual representation of what's going on there. Basically, in the inactivity, our factory has been overloading on resources. Copper and tin, and that's just because we're not using it on anything. That we don't normally have a problem with being overloaded on either of those things, really. I mean, copper to some extent, but it will disappear when this system is running because we can produce copper directly rather than getting it as a byproduct of making iron, which is why we're being overloaded, is because to make iron we have to make copper. So once that stops, we won't have a problem. And I mean, we could do something like putting a whole bunch of drones here to pick up this copper and send it over, and pick up the iron and send it over as well to stop this overload from happening. But, well, I was like, it's not that big a deal, but it looks like we're getting overloaded again. So we might have to do something like that, unfortunately. Or just do one huge belt. I mean, that could work too. Yeah, let's do a belt. It's just because this problem is getting worse, and now I have 2 warehouses that are critically full on copper. So I don't want to make a habit of this, but temporarily we will move some resources over here. And what's the best way to do it? Tons of belts or tons of drones? Honestly, I kind of don't feel like putting a bunch of belts down, and drones might work pretty well because there's a drone path right there, and if we move this drone path over, we can kind of pick it up from over here. So let's do that. Kind of got a little sidetracked here, but we got a disaster we have to avert. So let's drop some resources here. We need to make a request depot and a supply depot, and we need a ton of drones. How many? Let's grab 50 of them for now. And this is just a temporary measure to stop us from being overloaded on copper. So let's unhook this system here. Let's just undo the sapphirite, let it clear itself out naturally. I mean, we can send the iron over here, but we can also send the ingots too. I wonder if that would be an even better solution. Well, from a logistics standpoint, it doesn't really matter. But getting the iron ingots would be a little harder because they're kind of up here where the ore is down here. So let's just send the ore. And let's see, how are we going to do this? We can be kind of messy about it. Just go straight up. Let's see, so these are all yellow belts. So presumably that's what it needs to be. So we can have a belt going in here. And this is a total mess, but whatever. It's going to get picked up soon. Let's just set this here and say that the iron ore has to be less than, I don't know, like 1,000. And set that, because we still want this to operate if we need copper. So we don't want to just pick everything up. Let's see, how long can this be? It could be to right there. Just go over everything that's in the way, because who cares, it's all getting moved. All the way up to there. So request depot. We already have something supplying iron here. I guess it's it would be right here. It's probably going to be doing a bit of a loop. So we probably want to avoid that being the case. So let's just unhook this right there. Or I guess, how about right there? Because I don't think we're using those catalysts for anything else other than up here. And this isn't running right now, so it shouldn't break anything to have that turned off. Okay, well, drones should be on the way. They are. There's the fuel drones. Okay, and then we can keep going, and we're going to have some stuff we're going to have to clean up here. So let's do a supply depot here. Sure, let's have a loader with a circuit condition. And since we have 50 drones, well, let's do like 10,000. So iron has to be less than 10,000, and that'll turn on. And we'll just pull it off of that one line right there. And now it's starting to send drones out. So here's the iron system working, where when the level gets below 22,000, this fires up. And there's a small delay, but eventually gets to the warehouse, fills stuff up, and then when the warehouse fills, this turns off. And then it kind of cycles on and off, keeping the warehouse topped off. And it looks like drones have finally made it, and now they are picking up loads of iron. And here comes a drone delivery right when we're about to run out of drones. This should actually improve our output somewhat, because this setup was based on both sapphirite and stereotype running, but if it was only sapphirite running all the time, then we were only getting 66% of the total output of the machines that we've placed here. So by doing this, it should max it out. And there we go. No more copper overload. And we'll eventually work our way through that, and hopefully things will get back to normal. Why is this not running? Ah, that's facing the wrong way. Well, that's a bit of a problem. It looks like this one's alright. So it's just this side that was bad. Whoops, well, carbon will be delivered now. So we'll give the factory a little while to catch up. And we'll see how much time we have after we see what that iron production is going to look like. But Enzo was saying that we have a priority for filling up this tank. And the priority can be set using the inserters that handle the primary resource. So since we're making iron here, we can have all of the inserters moving iron ingots controlled by this tank. And then the inserters that move the rarer resources, those can be set up and hooked up to these warehouses right here. I did kind of create these warehouses for the purpose of that, but after thinking about it, I don't think it's really necessary. And the control will be more accurate if it's done on the ore sorting step as opposed to the ingot step here. So I just limited all of these warehouses to one stack, and they'll eventually clear out, and we'll still use them as like balancers and splitters and whatnot. But we don't need it for logic. It should work just fine without them. So we'll set this to 20. So we have status of the tank there. And then that can bounce across all of these. Then go in to each relevant inserter. And we'll set the inserter for if molten iron is less than 20,000, turn on. We need to do that for this other side as well. So all those are set up. But now the second most desirable is silicon, but we need to switch this to iron from silicon. get the wires connected. And we'll say if molten iron is less than 30,000, turn on. Now let's get this other side set up. And if iron is less than 40,000, turn on. Now we also need to get the signal in here from the ore bus here. But the signal that comes in is going to have all of the ores on it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just might be kind of a little hard to read if we're over here and hovering on this and we see all these ores. So let's do an arithmetic combinator. Put it in right here somewhere. Doesn't matter where. And we'll say the input is manganese ore times 1. And the output is manganese ore, just to separate that signal. And then we can attach it to our little network here. And let's do the same thing over here, except set it to silicon. So that way only the relevant ores are going to be showing up on this particular circuit network. And now we need to set them up. So as far as manganese, since manganese is purely a byproduct and this is the only place to use it, we want to use all of it. So we actually don't need to have any kind of special condition on that. So we'll just leave that in place. But for silicon, we do. So we'll run some wires down and say silicon ore has to be greater than 40,000 for this inserter to turn on. I think that's most of it. So let's review the logic again. Let's say this tank is full. Well, since it's above the set point, nothing happens. Well, when it gets below 40,000, oops, these are all set the same. This needs to be 40,000. So when that tank gets below 40,000, the inserters for iron from the iron and manganese setup will turn on and start inserting. Now, there's no logic connected to the inserters for manganese, so as long as manganese is available, these induction furnaces will run and fill up the tank. Now, it's not enough induction furnaces to power this whole thing. It's only half of it, basically. But they'll run as long as they can. So for whatever reason, let's say this tank gets below 30,000. Well, then the inserters for iron and silicon will turn on and start supplying iron. Now, this won't do anything unless silicon is also above 40,000. If it is, the silicon inserters will turn on. So if silicon inserters are turned on through logic and the iron inserters are turned on through logic, then this alloy machine will have everything it needs and will start filling this tank up. And let's say the tank level keeps going down to 20,000, then the iron inserters for the primary method of making it just through iron will turn on and supply resources. So from an output perspective, that we can run this whole setup on either just iron and manganese and iron and silicon. If those two are going at full blast, we can power this. But if only one of them is available, then they'll need to at least get some help from the iron furnaces. And if neither are available, then all of the iron furnaces in the middle can run to keep this filled up. And that's kind of the logic to how that works. And the other alloys will be similar in concept. In actual construction, they might be different because of various shape constraints and whatnot. And then all of that molten ore will go in here, get turned into coils, and then the coils will come out. And there'll probably be some kind of warehouse or something here. Although, strictly speaking, probably don't need to have a warehouse because there'll be a train station, which in itself will basically be a warehouse. Because there's no logic after this. After this, it's ready to go. But yeah, that's the first setup. So how are we doing on Iron and steel. Hey, we actually produced enough to continue. It's finally backing up. And this system is working as hard as it can. And we could retrofit it to get a higher output out of it, but I kind of don't feel like it. As long as it's good enough. I mean, we already got a 50% boost of output just by moving that copper around. Okay, well, since we have machines available, let's keep going. We need to make our steel setup. And there's no logic connected to this. It's just we're making as much as we can, so 7 induction furnaces and 20 casting machines. And yeah, it's a little less exciting to build all these first before placing them. But we kind of need to have an idea of how much space all this is going to take. I mean, from a size perspective, it's really not any bigger than this. But it might extend quite a far out to the left here, so... Plus, if we build a bunch of blueprints, we won't know exactly how many resources we'll need, but if we get them all built and placed, then we'll know exactly how many we need because they're already on the ground. But I'm not going to put them in blueprints for now, so hopefully I don't forget. Just pick them all up later. So we don't need any special logic here. Let's see, since this is going to be a little smaller, how about let's build it over here. Going to be building stuff all over the place. So 20 casting machines will make 30 plates. So I wonder if we should do... five on each side. Copy the same thing again. Then they can combine into a red belt, and that's the output right there. We need 6.7. Although just making 8 might be more square. So how about all the pipes right here? And they can kind of be up right there. Then 1, 2, 3, 4. And put some undergrounds in there. For good measure. Making molten steel. Might be better to have the belt in the middle here. I think I'd rather have 1 belt and 2 pipes than 2 belts and 1 pipe. Seems like it would be cleaner that way. Let's see. Something like that, and then inserters. 1 red. For each will be fine. There we go. That should be steel. Pretty straightforward. So let's do copper sheet coils, which is basically exactly the same ratio as iron here. It's just without the logic and the alloys. So it's actually very similar to this setup. So let's make a blueprint of it. And then modify what we don't need. So all of this will remain. The logic doesn't need to be there. So basically none of those machines right here. And don't worry about picking up all those little items in a bit. Well, if we're going to place it here, we might as well just plop it right next door. Doesn't have to be perfectly lined up, but close enough. And just when we're catching up, time to pick up a bunch of stuff again. Okay, let's go through here and erase all the things we don't need. I guess for symmetry reasons, I'll leave this tank in here, even though it's not really controlling anything. Okay, we need to get all of these things powered up. There are some unnecessary control wires in here. We'll set these to copper. and these to copper coils. And I think that's good. So the way the copper works is the copper ingots just come in, get melted down, get stored in the tank just for symmetry reasons. Doesn't need to be there. And then it gets distributed to all of these strand casting machines to make coils. So now we need to do the same thing with copper coils. And the setup will be smaller because we don't need as much. Basically exactly half size. So we can chop it in half in different ways. But I kind of like the idea of keeping them all the same width, just to allow some amount of expansion if necessary, because if we make it narrow, then if we want to make it bigger, we won't have any room. But if we make it the same width, but half as long, and leave the gaps the same, then we could expand production if we needed to. And it will also be more square. So we needed 30. Which is up until this point right here. So we can place that right there. Okay. We can set these to coils. Don't think it really changes anything as far as inserters are concerned. Then we need 14 of these right here. Actually, it might be easier to plop the whole thing down and then get it fixed in a bit. Although, probably want to get this all spaced out correctly. An underground pipe there to help line it up. Like about right there. Then we only need one side of each. But that's definitely not lined up. I think I lined it up with the wrong thing. Right there. And that's the wire coils. So now we need to do molten bronze, which has two different sources, both of which are copper and tin, and then the same output of 20 casting machines. It's going to get pretty crowded in here with all these setups. Well, we've already got 20 casting machines right here. So we can kind of place it over here. And set these for bronze. And then we need 2.3 and 3.4. So 3 and 4. So it'll be fairly similar to this, really. Well, let's copy that over. Then we'll get it like we want to. Then we can put it into place. So we'll pick this up, move it like one space over, so we can have the copper and tin coming in the middle. I have to move these lights here. Oh, and we're actually going to need to have some logic in here as well. So we're going to have to leave room for that, but both systems require copper and tin, so we can just do that through the middle. And then on the outside, we can have the nickel. And then we're going to have an output over here, which can be the nickel. Let's make a blueprint of that. Just pick it up for now. So we need to have a tank in here. There we go. And now this output can come back in here and have it reasonably centered, like right there. So we need to control the logic. more desirable, it's probably the nickel one, just to get rid of nickel if it's a byproduct. Otherwise, we can just make it the normal way. So we can send a wire over here. And we only need to put a wire on one of the inputs, since both tin and copper are always going to be required. We can just pick one to control it with. So let's just do copper. So for the less desirable way, let's say copper has to get under 30,000 to turn on. And for the more desirable way, how about 40,000? Okay. And now we just need to control these rare resource inserters, which in this case is nickel. So we need a combinator. And the input is the nickel ore signal times 1. And the nickel is the output. Might as well connect all these together so it's all on the same network. And then we'll make the nickel dump. 40,000. Now I'm not too worried about having a priority for the dumps. So in other words, if there's multiple places that we can dump nickel, I'm not worried about having a priority there, but the way we would is have these numbers set different. So the higher priority would be the lower number. So if the nickel was set to, oops, this is the wrong direction, it has to be over 40. So if we had something that was, say, over 30, that would have a higher priority than one that was set to over 40. But I'm not too concerned. I'm fine with the ore going anywhere. Basically, if we have an excess of it, we just want it to go away. So we don't really care which direction it goes, as long as it disappears. But that looks pretty good for bronze. So now we need to do brass, which there is only one way of. And it's twice as big because we want to have 60 plates a second. So since that's the case, probably can just copy this over and then make it bigger. Can we copy the entire thing again, have it light up? Almost. Copy the whole thing but the last row. And one more. Okay, set this to brass. Then we need 6.7 induction furnaces. But let's just pretend 8. And we can pick this up and try to reuse it by placing it right there. It looks like there's a missing pipe right here. And we can remove the unnecessary stuff. See, in this case, we don't really need the controls. I guess I'll leave the controls in. I might consider adding it to this just so it looks symmetrical like everything else. But for now, we can leave it as is. We don't need any of the wires for control. And set this to brass. We kind of do want to copy this up here just so it's a symmetrical 8 and something like that. Seems pretty good. Gunmetal. 20 casting machines and then only 2.3 induction furnaces. So this, but let's just do 4 furnaces so it's an even number. Ah yes, we do need to upgrade this because these are going to create 2 full red belts. Seems like we're creating these builds at just the same rate that we can supply the steel. So I haven't had to stop yet, so we are keeping up. So we set this to gunmetal. And we need to get 3 resources in here. So pick that up and move it over by 1. And we'll do some extra long inserters. And that should be all we need for gunmetal. And there's only the one type, so we don't need to worry about any logic. And then that output's right there. Ah, we need more space. Well, this is kind of important power lines, since that's all of our accumulators. So we don't quite want to pick those up without replacing them first. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we're going to finish up with our smelter planning. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.